council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings, and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's case is tentatively scheduled to be heard by the city council next month. Agendas can be found at topeka.org. For cases that require public hearings, the procedure will be as follows. First, the planning department staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comments should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Chris, will you please take the roll?
Okay, Mr. Armstrong.
Here.
Mr. Dean.
Here.
Mr. Freed.
Here.
Mr. Kalp.
Here.
Ms. Lawson.
Here.
Ms. Messina.
Here.
Ms. Ringler.
Here.
Mr. Warner.
Here.
And Mr. Kennard is absent. He's let me know ahead of time that he won't be here. We do have 8 and a quorum.
All right.
Before we get started, if I could just ask everybody to please, if you make a motion or say something, let me know who you are. We have a lot of people on and trying to keep track of who's saying what. That would be very helpful. Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Chris. All right, we'll move on to item B, approval of minutes.
Mark Freed would make a motion to approve.
Jim Kalp, second.
Motion and a second. Chris, please take the roll.
Okay, Mr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Freed,
Aye.
Mr. Kalp,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Ms. Messina,
Aye.
Ms. Ringler,
Aye.
and Mr. Warner.
Aye.
Motion passes 8-0.
All right, item C, declaration of conflict of interest, ex parte communications by members of the commission or staff. Hearing none, we'll move on to item D, action items. Item D1, public hearing of PUD 20/01, 6th and Golden Evergy Substation by Evergy Inc. Requesting to amend the district zoning map from X1 Mixed Use District to PUD Planned Unit Development District. X1 Mixed Use District uses, X1 Mixed Use District uses plus allowing a public utility station. Public utility station type 2 with an exception to the 62-foot height limitation for poles and towers on a 1.64 acre property located at the south side of Southeast 6th Avenue, lying between Southeast Golden and Southeast Highland Avenues. The rezoning allows the remodeling and expansion of the existing electric substation and allows transformers and dead-end structures poles to exceed the 62-foot height limit and allows towers up to a maximum height of 75 feet. Ms. Driver?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be making the presentation on behalf of Annie Driver.
Floor is yours, sir.
Can you go to the next slide, please? Here's a map showing the location of the site. It's on the south side of 6th Avenue between Golden and Highland. And go ahead and go to the next slide, please. As you mentioned before, this will allow this proposed zoning change to a PUD will allow reconstruction of the substation, expansion of the substation. It'll replace the expansion will replace the existing auto body repair business at the corner there. You might recall that earlier the applicant, Evergy, applied for a conditional use permit, and there was a issue about the height. As you might recall, the city may not allow a variance to a dimensional standard by way of a conditional use permit. So rather than apply for a variance for the height, the applicant withdrew the conditional use permit application and resubmitted as a plan unit development. Next slide. So the current zoning of the property, it's mixed use. And it's part of X1 mixed use along 6th Avenue, consisting of retail, automotive repair, auto sales, and residential or institutional uses. The zoning to the south is primarily residential. Next slide. The East Topeka Neighborhood Plan describes Southeast 6th for mixed-use neighborhood uses. Many of the current uses along Southeast 6th are automobile repair and sales and are non-conforming and don't entirely reflect the intention of the X1 district. The expansion of the substation will add landscaping along the street frontages. It involves rebuilding of the driveways and the frontages, and it will involve the extension of a screen wall. In staff's opinion, the project will generally improve the appearance of this corner. And that concludes staff's presentation. We are recommending approval.
Commissioners, questions for Mr. Hall?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Kopp?
one quick question. Mike, was there a variance ever requested from the BZA?
No, there was not, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? All right, if not, we would call for a presentation or comments by the applicant, followed by questions by the commission. Mr. Darby, are you representing the applicant this evening?
I'm here in addition to Chris Meyer and Dennis Lawler, both of Evergy. So I think Chris will speak, and I'm here to answer any questions that I may need to handle.
Alex can back me up. Yeah, it's just as Mike said, we applied for the CUP and received approval back in July, I believe it was. The issue was that 70-foot, 5-foot, what we call a dead end structure inside the substation, which exceeded the code height requirement or the height limitation. So we, I guess, withdrew that and applied for the PUD. And pretty much everything else that Mike has stated as far as the screen wall, the use of the facility, the expansion. It's why, it's necessary at that location. And we have a willing landowner that wants to sell his property. So it worked out well in that regard. We were just, everything's kind of hinging on this condition on the, this code condition on the 62-foot tower. And Alex, if you want to, or Dennis, if you want to contribute anything to that conversation.
Right, to kind of speak to that, the screening wall on the northeast and west sides will all be replaced with the newer stone cast wall. You've probably seen it at some of the newer substations that Evergy has done around town. In lieu of it's kind of a thin wall. Now the architects in the group might be able to speak to that, but so it'll be a much better looking facility. It'll have some newer equipment in it as well. So I just kind of to speak to that, as well as is additional. Right now, there isn't any landscaping around it beyond just grass that gets mowed on a regular basis. So it'll really clean that corner up quite a bit. So yeah. With that, I guess any questions from the commission?
Commissioners, any questions for Evergy or Mr. Darby? All right, hearing none, we will call for public comments. Each speaker, let us know if you would like to speak to this, state your name. At the conclusion of each speaker's comments, Commission will have the opportunity to ask questions. Anyone from the public here this evening wishing to speak towards this item? All right, with that, I would close the public hearing. No further public comments will be received. Commissioners, I would entertain a motion.
This is Corliss Lawson. I lost it. Based on the findings and analysis in the staff report, I move to recommend to the governing body approval of the rezoning from X1 mixed-use district to PUD planned unit development, X1 mixed-use district plus the use of a public utility facility type 2.
Corey Dean, second.
Just a clarification, Mr. Hall, do we want that to be subject to the 6 conditions listed in the staff report?
Yes, I would recommend adding that to the motion.
Cordless, would you be okay with that friendly amendment?
Yes.
And who is the second?
I second. Corey?
Do you concur with
I'm
that
good.
addition
I
as
concur.
well? All right, thank you. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Chris, would you please take the roll?
Okay, just to warn you, I'm going to start from the bottom up. Mr. Warner,
Aye.
Ms. Ringler,
Aye.
Ms. Messina. Did we lose her?
We did.
Mr. Kalp,
Aye.
Mr. Freed,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Armstrong.
Aye.
I didn't hear Ms. Messina. Have we lost her or somebody?
And you didn't call me, Chris.
Ms. Lawson?
Yes, aye.
Okay. I'm going to put Ms. Messina as no vote then, and the motion passes 7-0 with none abstaining.
All right, thank you. That concludes our action items for this evening. Next up, presentation and discussion items. Item E1, Downtown Master Plan Update with a focus on the Tower and Van Buren districts. Mr. Finder, perhaps? Bill is frozen on my screen.
He looks pensive, though.
He's ready to tear into the Tower District discussion.
He's building up for a big outburst.
Dan looks like he's frozen too, and it would be either Dan or Bill.
Oh, hold on. Dan's video's off.
Miss Messina is back.
Oh yeah, Mrs.
I see
Messina is
that.
back.
She's
Yes, my whole internet. I don't know what was up, but I lost it. I'm on my phone right now trying to get my computer back working.
Must be the same bug that got Bill and Dan.
You missed a contentious debate.
We're just gonna have to rehash it.
That'll be in the minutes. Mr. Warner's back walking around.
That's kind of spooky.
You can stroll and give us the downtown master plan update.
He's going to do it walking downtown.
Yeah.
He may be
that's
walking to the
pretty
tower
cool.
at this point. Live from the tower.
If I can suggest, why don't y'all go to short-term rentals? Because I think that's Mike Hall's item. You could
I'm ready.
start talking about that and then come back.
I'm ready. Mine
Yeah,
will be shorter.
I think we lost Mike too.
Oh, we did lose Mr. Hall.
It's a
So
rough day at City Hall.
we have Dan back. Dan, do you want to start on
Absolutely.
Tower and Van Buren districts? All right,
Yes.
let's do that.
All right, commissioners. Just as a quick reminder, we are doing district plans for all of the districts that you see on that map. This particular update that you're getting tonight is for the Tower and Van Buren. So first up is Tower. And we currently have 9 districts. We've combined Noto and River North. So every district has a district brand. So the district brand for the Tower District is an urban village. So essentially this is a new neighborhood that could include a signature sports complex that will be surrounded by new homes in the form of townhomes, duplexes, and small scale apartment buildings. Residents will appreciate being within walking distance of the activity on Kansas Avenue while maintaining a little more space, privacy, and quiet. So the key characteristics of the Tower District is a sports complex, residential village, townhomes, signature park space, connection to heritage sites. So there are 2 options, 2 future development options with the Tower District. This first one is a sports complex Fieldhouse. There are a few things that are consistent between the options. So in both options, we have development along Kansas Avenue to fill in some parking lots and some underutilized space to help restore the street wall. So for instance, on that map 4 and 5 are kind of doing that on this particular option. In both options, we have missing middle development. You may remember from the housing study update that Topeka needs more diversity in its housing types. And we really think downtown can be a real catalyst for adding that missing middle type development. And also the water tower, which is what the district gets its name from, the city's water tower, number 5 on that map. In both options, that is a climbing tower. So the big draw on this option is number 1 there. That's the sports complex Fieldhouse. You can see that oriented there between 10th and 11th streets, or 10th and 12th streets, sorry, Quincy and Monroe. In this option, we do straddle 11th and close it. We thought that was a better option than closing either Monroe or Quincy. Keeping those streets open is a little more important to the downtown network. So with that sports complex at number 1, we would expect some spin-off development, some pressure for services. So number 2 here on the map is a potential future boutique hotel across the street from the sports complex. And I also mentioned we could see some development along Kansas Avenue that could support, again, some things to do for the kids that come to the sports complex. What we typically don't like to show on our plans is surface parking lots. We're trying our best to not let that be the best use of land. But in this case, this parking lot that's south of the water tower is a current city parking lot, and we're leaving it on this option as a parking lot. Number 9 on the map is a flex space, so that's potential for either parking, surface parking in the future, or some missing middle if parking is well accommodated within the footprint of the sports complex. So the second option for the Tower District is a residential village. So number 1 on this particular option, instead of part of the Fieldhouse, we have a large multifamily or maybe even a hotel along 10th Street there. As we transition back to the south, that's where we see the missing middle type development, the townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, et cetera. And then in this option on that city parking lot, we do include some of that missing middle development. So this option really becomes more of the residential village. We tried not to have, except with the exception of south along Kansas Avenue, too much development south of 12th Street. It's a more intact neighborhood south of 12th than it is north of 12th. Here's some images that kind of show what we're talking about. So the sports courts are on the upper right-hand corner. That could be part of the sports courts option. The image on the left is the climbing tower. So we think that could possibly fit on the water tower. And then these images show what the possible residential village development type could look like. Again, some of that missing middle, duplex, triplex, townhomes, et cetera. This slide, what we do with this slide is show how this district's development, how it takes up its share of development in downtown. But what is important to note here is we don't expect any of the growth in the Tower District to be within the next 10 years. So the market study, which we're trying to hit, those numbers that's a 10-year market study. So this is development we don't think will happen within 10 years in the Tower District. With that, if there's any questions on the Tower District, if not, I can do Van Buren next. No, okay.
This says you couldn't see that feedback.
Okay, so next up is the Van Buren District. This is, so this district is north of the Capitol and south of River South. So basically between the Capitol and the River South District, one of our larger districts here. The district brand for Van Buren is somewhat similar to the Tower in that there's some residential proposed here, but this is really meant to be sort of a residential corridor. So this district will act as a spine for a new residential neighborhood with retail nodes at key corners. There are numerous underutilized properties and parking lots that provide great sites for new upscale apartments. These high quality buildings will raise the bar for downtown housing and provide alternatives and quality that cannot be found elsewhere in the city. So the keys here are residential focus, a neighborhood feel. This is where we expect the new construction for downtown to happen on the residential side. So let's move on to the development. So first thing I want to point out on this slide is the density. So the residential density, again, kind of being a new residential neighborhood. The residential density will be higher south of 6th Street. So between 6th and 7th, we have our highest density of residential on that map. As you go north towards the river, you begin to transition down in density. We get more into the missing middle. And in fact, there's a single family neighborhood that's in the sort of the northwest corner of this district. So I mentioned the missing middle, like the Tower District. This We expect some missing middle development to happen in this district as well. Not all of the development in this district will be within 10 years either. We have to balance this district against all of our other districts, and there just isn't enough demand, market demand, to accommodate this district building out in the next 10 years. So if we look at the map, number 1 on the map is a large multifamily. So we're showing that large multifamily here at in the state parking lot that's immediately north of the large office building. So this parking lot currently takes up most of this entire block here. So we were proposing that for multifamily development, some mixed use on the corners, and then parking in the interior. The other number 1 on the map is at 5th and Jackson. This is currently a city parking lot. So this is also where we're showing some multifamily development. I want to point out number 2 on the map, which is a mixed use with a grocery anchor. That would be at 6th and Jackson, 6th and Van Buren. We are showing that currently as outside of 10 years. Again, the missing middle is number 5 on the map here. So those townhomes, duplexes, et cetera, that are more on this end of the district. And then finally on this map, I want to point out that Van Buren will actually extend under Polk Quincy Viaduct when it gets rebuilt by KDOT. So Van Buren currently dead ends at Polk Quincy. When that gets rebuilt, you'll have a straight shot from the Capitol, essentially from the Capitol to the river along Van Buren. These images show the potential housing choices in the neighborhood. This is good to show the range of density as well. So the image on the left is a multifamily development with some mixed use. And you also have attached units and duplex, more of the missing middle on the middle and center, or the middle and the right image. We expect this neighborhood to have neighborhood services. So the downtown YMCA is currently in the neighborhood. We put a BART park on that future development map, and you can see some of the mixed use on the key intersections. We were fortunate to be able to secure assistance from Architect One and Scott Gales to envision Van Buren. So these images are images that Architect One provided us. So the image on the upper left-hand corner is 7th and Van Buren looking north. So that new multifamily project on that big parking lot. The image on the upper right-hand corner is the mid-block between 6th and 7th on Van Buren. So that's looking south towards the Capitol. The image on the lower left is at 6th and Van Buren. And then the image on the lower right is 7th and Harrison looking north. One major thing to point out in this district is the conversion of Jackson and Harrison to 2-lane traffic. So Jackson and Harrison are currently one-way pairs, and those are proposed to be converted to 2-way traffic. So meeting the needs, so the Van Buren district will contribute to housing, office, and retail for our overall downtown market. With that, commissioners, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Warner, so that big multi-family block, that's the parking lot currently for the Eisenhower State Office Building?
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah, it's the big parking lot immediately north of the Eisenhower.
Okay.
So,
Commissioners, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Kopp.
Dan, I'm a little bit lost here. Where are we? What is the status of both these plans? This is just an update of the staff work on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So what we've done with each of our districts to date is put together presentations that hit sort of the 30,000 foot view here. And we've been communicating with you and also a couple downtown stakeholder groups. Next phase is to send out story maps, so GIS story maps of the district plans themselves. So starting, in a couple of weeks, we'll begin sending out these story map links to property owners downtown and see if they have feedback. There'll be more information, so more about land use and zoning and implementation within those story maps.
And Dan, you said that within the next couple of weeks, that information is going out?
Yeah, that will go out for not all the districts. We're going to roll out a couple at a time. And then, starting next year, so we'll try to get through those story maps through the end of this year. And then starting next year, do more public engagement and more of the plan. So there's still, different parts of the plan that still have to kind of get put together.
And again, just one other question, Dan. With respect to both plans, the parking, the public parking that's identified on both of them, that's all surface level?
Not necessarily. So the image here that's up, that P that's surrounded by those buildings, we would likely expect that to be at least somewhat below grade. So to accommodate all that development, plus perhaps even the state's parking needs. So generally speaking, we're not trying to show new parking lot.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Dan.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair, I have a kind of a question. What's the thought behind going from a one-way street to a two-way street on some of these?
Really just to improve the overall circulation downtown, make those streets more pedestrian oriented, increase parking, just create a more logical way for people to get around. The one way, in our opinion, the one-way streets have really outlasted their usefulness. It's time to bring back two-way traffic, slow it down, and bring the pedestrians into the equation. Oh, and we did in our process of getting the Capital District ready for public. We communicated with Frank Burnham at the state and ran that idea, specifically those two-way changing those to two-way pairs, and no concerns there.
Thank you, Mr. Warner. All right, with that, we will move on to our second presentation this evening. Item E2, short-term rentals. A report by planning staff regarding draft changes to the zoning code, creating new standards for short-term rentals and results of October information meetings with stakeholders. Short-term rentals are regulated as bed and breakfast home and bed and breakfast inn in the current zoning code.
Mr. Chair, this is Bill Fyander. I am not Dan Warner.
Welcome back.
Yeah, many times we do interchange personalities here, but so tonight I'm Dan Warner. I'm going to introduce Mr. Hall, who is shown as me. So don't worry, we're all good. But that's the best way to get you audio from us tonight. So I just wanted to give a little background into the short-term rental history, how we got here, and then Mike can take it away with the proposed amendment and the process that we're going through. But short-term rentals such as Airbnb have really been on our radar for a few years, but when we do our code amendments, but we just haven't had it rise to the top. We haven't had any complaints over the years, and that was until recently. So we've always known it was something we probably need to update in our code. Within the last 12 months, we did start receiving a complaint in the Auburndale neighborhood with some of the short-term rentals. That went through an enforcement process, which ultimately ended in a Board of Zoning Appeals hearing, which found that, yes, indeed, short-term rentals do qualify as a bed and breakfast home, and that is what our current definitions in the zoning code allow. So a bed and breakfast home was determined to be the equivalent for short-term rentals. It was my decision at that point, in consultation with legal, that it might be a good idea to pause enforcement until we can truly have a properly researched and vetted code amendment for short-term rentals. Even though the Board of Zoning Appeals made that determination, it was pretty clear to us that it was not a very good hand-in-glove fit. There were certain distinctions that just did not make sense. And so before we went forth on any enforcement, we pulled that back and has done some research and have come forth back with a proposal on short-term rentals. We did present that to owners and operators of short-term rentals in the last week. And so Mr. Hall is going to present, well, in addition, we did adjacent neighbors as well. We sent out almost 500 notices. So we had quite a bit of coverage on this. There was 2 very good sessions that we had presenting this proposal to those affected, those stakeholders. So tonight, I think Mr. Hall will just go over those questions that came out of those sessions, as well as share with you the research and the proposal as presented to those stakeholders last week. And then my guess is, since you have not seen this, commissioners, my intent would be to send this presentation back out to you all after tonight. So with that in mind, are there any questions about background before we hand off? Okay, if not, Mr. Hall, take it away.
Thank you. If you could go to the next slide, Chris. Okay, this shows you where we're at in the process. We've done the research. We had 2 stakeholder meetings last week, and tonight we're having the discussion. This is not a public hearing. It's for discussion. Then we'll come back potentially as early as December 21st with a public hearing. It's hard to say, but we'll be back shortly, I expect, with a recommendation and for a public hearing, and then it'll go to City Council. Next, please. Okay, so a bit about the research. So in your packet, along with the cover memo, there's a report that was done by one of our staff, Melissa Fahrenbrook, and also a draft of the code changes that we're proposing. So collected information on March 24th, 2020. So when you do this kind of research and you look on these sites, you have to go months into the future, because if you try to collect it at a point in time that's too soon, the sites will be booked. And so the dates we used were November 6th to the 13th of this year. We searched the Vrbo, Flipkey, HomeAway, and Airbnb platforms. We found a total of 32 properties in city limits, 25 of which are non-owner occupied. And there might be more sites, I'm sure there are, but we found 32 at the time we looked at them in that November window. So they're pretty spread out for the most part. There are two clusters, I would say, clusters in Holiday Park and the cluster in Auburndale. The Auburndale cluster is not it's not a very major cluster. There are really three close together, but that's what initiated the enforcement action back at the beginning of the year. Next slide, please. Okay, so this shows you how they're distributed in the different zoning districts. I think the important thing here is that most of these are in single-family residential zoning districts, with some of them being in multifamily zoning districts. There are only a few that are in commercial and industrial and mixed-use districts. And really the issue here is not so much how these fit in the other districts. These are at their worst, these are going to be like motel or hotel rooms. So the real issue is, are they appropriate in single family districts? We feel that they are, as long as they're controlled properly. Next slide. We looked at other regulations in other cities. I won't spend a lot of time on this. I think the important thing here is that Lawrence they adopted some standards a few years ago, or about 2 years ago, I believe. And they came back recently, revisited those standards, and they decided to prohibit the non-owner occupied short-term rentals in the single-family residential districts. The other thing that's important about what they do is they do an initial inspection, and they require a renewal every 2 years. Keep in mind, Lawrence also requires licensing of all rentals, all long-term rentals, in addition to short-term rentals. Manhattan, they haven't really specifically regulated this. They know that they need to address it. It's an issue over there, as I understand. Overland Park, they don't address short-term rentals any different than long-term rentals. They require licensing for rentals. Just to be clear, Topeka, we do not require licensing for rental of property, residential property. And KCK, they require a special use permit and public hearing and action by the governing body, and they require inspections every 2 years. Next slide, please. Okay, so this doesn't cover all of what's in the draft, but this is what's important. So currently, we define these are defined as bed and breakfast home, which is a owner occupied. Bed and breakfast inn is non-owner occupied. And then we have, but the thing that is important in our current code is there are only two categories, and the bed and breakfast inn allows up to 10 guest rooms. As proposed, what we're proposing is we update these so they're more like what's happening in other cities where they've updated them, and also that they reflect current practices. What's happened a lot in the last 5 to 10 years is not only has the sharing economy grown, but internet commerce has grown as well, and these online platforms have gone into use, and so that's changed things quite a bit. And so we're recommending that there be three categories. Type 1 would be the owner occupied with a maximum of 3 sleeping rooms for a period of less than 30 days. Type 2 would be non-owner occupied, maximum 3 sleeping rooms for a period less than 30 days. And type 3 may or may not be owner occupied, 4 to 10 sleeping rooms for a period less than 30 days. So when people think of bed and breakfast inn, if you think the traditional bed and breakfast inn, it's really comparable to the type 3 more than the types 1 and 2. I'd say the types 1 and 2 are probably more common in short-term rentals. The other thing we've done is we've added a definition, or we're proposing to add a definition for owner-occupied, where the owner must reside for 182 days or more per year, which that's about half of the year, 365 days in a year. I think the other thing that's important to point out is currently the bed and breakfast home and bed and breakfast inn, the bed and breakfast inn allows up to 4 sleeping rooms or guest rooms, and we're proposing that it be limited to 3. There's not really a magical number, but we've proposing that it be scaled back by 1. Not sure that's the best thing to do, because we do have non-owner occupied short-term rentals out there now, which are bed and breakfast, actually meet the definition of bed and breakfast inn, that have more than 3 or 4 sleeping rooms. They're houses with 5 bedrooms in some cases. I don't know how many there are, but there are some. Next slide, please. Okay, I think what's important, and this is really key, is how this is treated in terms of whether the use is allowed, conditional, or prohibited in residential zoning districts. So if you are familiar with the land use table, the zoning matrix in our code, it lists all the zoning districts and all the different uses. And currently, bed and breakfast home, bed and breakfast inn are listed as uses. And in the table, it'll identify whether that use is allowed, conditional, or prohibited in various districts. Currently, both bed and breakfast home, bed and breakfast inn require a conditional use permit in the single family and 2-family residential districts. What is being recommended is that a conditional use permit not be required, but that they be allowed subject to specific standards. And the reason for that is when you think about how many of these there are, we haven't really received a lot of complaints. We've received complaint because they were concentrated probably more than anything else. And also related to the complaints we received is there's no parking standard. There's no clear parking requirement. So we're recommending that they be allowed in these districts subject to these standards. Next slide, please. So a couple important things here is under the current standards, homes and inns, they must retain their appearance as a single family residence, giving no appearance of a business use. And that's important because a lot of times these just go unnoticed, I believe, because they just look like a regular house. We're recommending that not change. So what's important with bed and breakfast homes is currently they may not be used for weddings, receptions, and similar events. Bed and breakfast inns may be used for these events, but with many restrictions. So what we're recommending is short-term rental types 1 and 2 may not be used for weddings, receptions, and similar events. Remember that there's another category, short-term rental type 3. Next, please. So currently the parking standards are not very clear, or they're just non-existent. It doesn't specifically address it for these uses. There's no stated off-street parking requirement for bed and breakfast homes. There are for events in bed and breakfast inns, but if an inn doesn't have an event, then it's not clear that there's a parking standard or a parking requirement. What's recommended that for short-term rental type 1, remember, short-term rental type 1 is the owner occupied, that 1 off-street parking space be required for the primary resident and 1 off-street parking space for transient guests, 2 spaces total. So what we're recommending is that there be 2 spaces required in most cases, no more than 2 spaces. But what's also important, and I'll show you this in the diagram in the next slide, is that 2 of those spaces may be provided on the street frontage if the residential lot has 44 feet of unobstructed street frontage. So for short-term rental type 2, it's the same as a single-family dwelling, 2 spaces depending on the size of the dwelling. Up to 2 of those spaces may be provided on street with 44 feet of unobstructed frontage. You might ask why there is a difference, and the reason there's a difference is because with a owner-occupied short-term rental, consider that you have the owner who will have their own need for parking. They'll have 1 or 2 vehicles typically, and then they might rent a guest room to each individual. So each guest room that's occupied quite likely will be associated with a car. So someone occupying a single guest room will drive there in most cases. With a non-owner occupied, which is the type 2, typically someone who rents a non-owner occupied short-term rental is renting the whole thing for the whole building, the whole residence for their single use. You're not going to have 3 or 4 unrelated people or people that don't know each other staying in a non-owner occupied short-term rental. Next slide, please. So this is a diagram that illustrates how the parking standard would be applied. So in this case, this is actually an existing short-term rental. It's an owner-occupied short-term rental in Auburndale, and there's potential for 2 off-street parking spaces off the alley. There is some street frontage, but there's only 37 feet of street frontage. So in this case, as under the recommended standards, with on-street parking. Next slide, please. So another issue, as we have discovered, based on the BZA case earlier this year, is that one of the issues is concentration of these within a particular neighborhood. So currently, there's no express requirement. Certainly, if someone applied for a conditional use permit, the issue could arise, parking could arise, and it could be addressed as part of a conditional use permit, but there's no specific standard for it, no restriction. As recommended, for short-term rental type 1, there would be no standard, there would be no restriction, but for the type 2, they could be located no closer than 500 feet from another type, short-term rental type 2 or 3. Next, please. So the other thing that's important to note here is that if one or more of these standards cannot be met, the owner may apply for a conditional use permit. Next. So for the short-term rental type 3, compared to what's currently the bed and breakfast inn standard, is more specific off-street parking standards are recommended, and we've drafted those. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, so we have a number of questions and comments that came out of the stakeholder meetings. I'm just going to go over a few of those. I think these are the ones that require most of our attention. So one of the questions is, why change the requirement from a CUP, conditional use permit, which requires a public hearing, which invites comment and input from neighboring property owners? Why change this to an administrative permit where no public hearing is required? And our answer to that is, I think I mentioned it before, is that a lot of times people aren't even aware of these exist. So requiring a conditional use permit for them is really an unreasonable and unnecessary requirement. I think the other thing is that a conditional use permit, if there are a lot of these, you potentially lead to arbitrary decisions. If they're not bound to certain standards, then they're kind of all over the place. And consider that back earlier this year, when the decision was made to not require a conditional use permit, if we were to apply that requirement in a very even-handed, equitable fashion, we would have required all of those operators to obtain conditional use permits. And when you think about the burden on the Planning Commission agenda and on planning staff, it's just a lot of work. And if we have, it's staff's recommendation or opinion that if we have well thought out, effective standards, then requiring a conditional use permit is unnecessary, and it's not even really a desired outcome or a desired process. So next question is, if a current owner operator does not now meet the concentration separation standard of 500 feet, how will that be resolved going forward? So that's a really good question, but actually we've looked at it, and currently all of them meet that standard that we're aware of. All of them that we're aware of meet that standard. There is a way to address that. You could add a date where that takes effect, that concentration standard takes effect. It could be specifically included in the code, and that might be something that the legal counsel would advise us to do or not to do, but that's one way to address it. Keep in mind that the existing short-term rentals in single-family residential districts, they are not grandfathered. So you can't apply that logic to these because they are currently require a conditional use permit. We're actually recommending that the standards be less rigorous than they are now, if in terms of whether a conditional use permit is required or not. Next slide, please. Next question is, will the administrative permit include a time limit? Will it require the owner operator to renew or reapply? So as recommended, the answer is no. Typically, in the case of a zoning application or a zoning permit, we don't impose time limits. It's not that we can't. Certainly with a conditional use permit, we can impose a time limit. But if you compare this to the home occupation permit, home occupation, the idea with a home occupation, like short-term rentals, is that it can be done almost incidental to a residential use. And the nature of the use, the nature of the building, the property remains residential. So we look at this as being similar to a home occupation. So as recommended, as drafted, we're not recommending there be a time limit. On the other hand, that's something that might be a relevant and necessary requirement. So I think that that's something that, we're asking you to consider that and to advise us if you think there should be a time limit. And if there's a time limit, it could be a 2-year time limit, it could be a 3-year time limit. I think you just establish it in the code, and that's what at least one other city we know about has done. So another question that came up, other cities require operators of short-term rentals to maintain liability insurance. Is the city considering that as a requirement? We're not recommending that at this time. And I think we could research this a bit more. My understanding of the liability insurance is that it's intended to protect the property owner, not the neighbors. So it's really not if that's the case, it's really not a zoning issue. The purpose of zoning isn't necessarily to protect that property owner. It's protect neighbors from impacts of that property. Consider that Airbnb, from what I understand, they require an insurance policy, and that's to protect the owner from a renter that let's say they have a party or something, they damage the home. That's my understanding of the purpose of that liability coverage. So I'm not sure why this is necessary. I think that's something that we could look into. If it's just there to provide a barrier, that's not really what we're trying to do is provide barriers to short-term rentals. One thing that something to consider, and something that really came out of the BZA case, is that in some cases, the fact that owners can use these as short-term rentals provides them an income stream that supports their investment in the property. The other thing is if they're going to attract renters, they have to have a decent property to attract renters. They're not going to attract a short-term rental if their property is not well maintained, generally speaking. And so we don't necessarily want to put up barriers to short-term rentals. I think the intent is to control their downside, their potentially adverse impacts. So that's our presentation on this, and I would love to hear your comments and questions and direction. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question for Mike.
Sure.
I'm thinking of somebody who has a conditional use permit right now, and if this is adopted, let's say they come in as a type 2 or would qualify, classified as a type 2, but they can't meet one of the standards. And I think one of your slides indicated earlier that they would have the opportunity to apply for a CUP if they couldn't meet the standard. But if that's correct, my question is, does that mean that somebody currently holding a conditional use permit would have to come in and apply for a new one under that fact situation?
Commissioner Kalp, that's a good question. From what I know, we have not approved any conditional use permits for short-term rentals or for bed and breakfast homes or inns. So that wouldn't apply in that case. Even if we had, and we might have, I'm not aware of any, I couldn't find any, we couldn't find any. But if we had, then they would, I believe, be considered a legal non-conforming use, and they would not have to meet the new standard. So if there was something, if we had approved a conditional use permit, we basically gave them approval to operate under their current or the conditions at the time they applied. New standards being adopted would not affect them.
Yeah, I like what you're doing. I like the concepts that you're looking at. I think it would be an improvement over what we have right now on the books. But I just would ask you to be sensitive to any situations that arise or you identify where somebody's holding a current conditional use permit and would be adversely affected by the new regulations.
Thank you.
Mr. Hall, you talked about potentially a public hearing back before us as early as the December Planning Commission meeting. What's your process between now and getting back before us as far as any additional public hearings or content in that time, or are you just refining the revisions to the document itself?
Mr. Chairman, we've identified all these issues and questions, and I think the important thing, first of all, is to be able to answer those questions. We've prepared we're in the process of preparing a Q&A, frequently asked questions and responses to those, just so that can be part of the record. It can also be put on our website, but also we can do a little more research and put a little more thought to how to maybe refine these standards to address those issues. And then that's what we would bring forward. That'll take some time. And we expect we'll get some more input. We've gotten quite a lot of input, actually, a lot of interest. And there are some concerns of people. Not so much the owners. I think the feedback we've gotten from owners is fairly positive, but neighboring property owners. So at this point, it's just a matter of time putting that together and bringing it back. The other thing that might affect this is what our agenda looks like in December. It looks like we might have a number of items on the agenda. And so, we want to make sure that this gets the attention it deserves. And so that could affect how soon it comes back.
Mr. Chairman, one other question for Mike, if I might. Looking at the proposed text amendments, I note that the 182 days is set out as per calendar year. Is that same thing true? Supposed to be true of the 30 days? We're talking about 30 days per calendar year for types 1, 2, and 3, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me just add something to that, though, Commissioner. One of the suggestions we received from a current operator is to define short-term rental by 28 days because it's consistent with the way the state of Kansas deals with these in terms of revenue collection. And so that's just a minor change we might make is define it by 28 days rather than 30 days.
Is that what other cities have done?
It varies. It seems like it's 28 days, 30 days, 31 days. I think 28 days is probably because that's the shortest month of the year.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Hall this evening? So I do see we have perhaps some non-commissioners on the call, still on the call. They may be interested in this actual topic since they stayed on. If anyone was wishing to provide comments this evening, maybe you could let us know now, and I'd leave it up to the will of the commission, and if we wanted to consider that at this point.
I don't believe this is scheduled for a public hearing, is it?
That's correct. It's not. We could take comments if there was a motion and we chose to do so at this point. We have in the past, but I just wanted to, I can't tell who's on or why. So just trying to
I'm Elizabeth Taylor. I would be willing to make a comment if allowed.
I'll express my opinion, but I'm just one person on the commission. This is just provided to us, as my understanding, for information comment. I assume it's going back out to others, and we're going to have a public hearing. I don't know where this goes once we open it up to one person. Not saying that it wouldn't be legitimate concerns, but my thought is when do we have a public hearing and when do we not have a public hearing? Is my concern about how we're handling that.
All right.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think I agree with the commissioner on that point. Everything, not to be impolite to the people who've been listening in and watching, but it can give the appearance of some kind of undue influence or what have you. This is not a public hearing.
All right, we thank all of you that listened in this evening and appreciate your comments, Mr. Freed and Mr. Kopp. With that, I believe we will move on to the final agenda item this evening, communications to the commission. Mr. Finder, you're back under Mr. Finder. Congratulations.
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Looks like it. Yeah, just two quick things. One, all the zoning cases, 29th and Croco, the Stormont Vale, they were approved at council the other week, as well as the annexation for 6-0 North, and the Timber Ridge plat was accepted as well. So everything that you've heard in the last month did get final consideration for approval from the governing body. My other announcement communication would be to let you know just a slight little reorganization. As many of you know, our department has taken on another division, the housing division for the city, which has prompted a change in how I have had assignments. So in the future, I was doing the duty of division director for the planning division, as well as the department director for the department. So with that in mind, I'm going to give up some of my duties for the day-to-day running of the planning division to Dan Warner. Dan's being promoted to the division director for planning. I will stay the department director overseeing planning division, development services, and housing. So Dan will just be a little more involved in the nuts and bolts of current planning, but certainly I'm still remain your liaison, the secretary to the planning commission. But I wanted you to know that that was happening, and Dan has been a valued contributor over the years. And with this new reorganization that's kind of came down from the city manager, we felt it was the right time to promote Dan and have him take some more of the reins here in the planning division. So with that, and he left, so I can't, he's not hearing any of this. So I guess I can't embarrass him tonight, but wanted you to know that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Well, congratulations to Mr. Warner. Please pass that on, and we'll see him soon. And well deserved. Looking forward to working with him some more. I believe that concludes this evening's meeting. Motion to adjourn. Anyone?
Mark Freed, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second, we are adjourned. Appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you for listening in this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks.